I do not understand. I just simply cannot fathom people not seeing what I'm about to say. I just don't get it. I can't imagine missing this.
So I was recently scheduled to have a discussion with Richard Madsen, aka Demolish Doctrine, which unfortunately had to be postponed. I had hoped to discuss with him his unique interpretation of Scripture, but seeing as there's going to be a delay, I thought I might highlight a specific facet of his logic and my criticisms and present it to him and all of you in hopes of progressing the forthcoming discussion further right off the bat. So let's get to work, shall we? Demolish Doctrine makes the argument that there has been no Sabbath. It is a buttress to his larger goal of unifying Christianity within his particular ostensible interpretation of Scripture and subsequent theology. It's important to note at the onset that in the reference conversation, which I linked in the description, Richard makes the point that his interpretation of the Genesis creation narrative is that it is comprehensive of all time, meaning that it describes God's creation journey from the beginning all the way to the end, where God's first day of creation starts with the "let there be light," and the sixth day of creation starts with the formation of Adam and is still ongoing. The seventh day is yet to come, wherein God will finally rest once, quote-unquote, all has been fulfilled. I suspect that once we actually get to talk together about this, the disagreement is going to boil down to the plurality of the ancient Hebrew language. The fact is, when one word means multiple concepts, the language's utility is diminished, because it codifies equivocation. If the word Mayim means H2O, crowd, quantum fields, spirit of God, yada yada, then every time I say Mayim, you have to either critically decipher my meaning from the context, solicit further verbiage, or assume that your first impression or interpretation is accurate, all of which either waste time and energy or diminish the relationship between reality and the words we use to describe it. So with all that in mind, let's take a peek in a cross-section of Richard's theology, an argument he presented to Dr. Josh Bowen, again linked in the description of this video. It's a series of 4 syllogisms.
According to the text, God works with man. Working negates resting. God is not resting. God is not resting. God rests on the Sabbath. God is not in his Sabbath. God is not in his Sabbath. The Sabbath is made for God. There has been no Sabbath.
Back to syllogism 1. Premise 1. God works with man. What do you mean by work? Is there supposed to be an implication of the word always or constantly at the end here? God always works with man? Eternally? Consistently? Does God stop working with man after the culmination of Revelation? Is it unreasonable to think that his work with man will continue into eternity after the reconciliation of mankind unto himself? Or, as you might say, assimilation? Okay, premise 2. Working negates resting. I guess that's true, but I think it's a little bit vacuous here. There's no modifier that precludes cycles of work and rest for God. And then the conclusion, God is not resting. Okay, maybe not. He did definitely rest, though, on the 7th day according to the Bible. In Genesis chapter 2, verses 2 through 3, it says, "By the 7th day God had finished the work he had been doing, so on the 7th day he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done." Rest and work are temporal concepts that seem to be contradictory to atemporality. A God that exists without or outside of time can't go from resting to working states, in my estimation. God worked, then rested. Then is a temporal adverb. Without a temporal qualifier, this syllogism fails to be compelling. For analogy, let's say pizza is hot. Hot negates cold. Therefore, pizza is not cold. You see the problem there? obviously pizza goes from hot to cold, temporally speaking. Some scientific theories propose that entropy is responsible for the irreversibility of time's flow and the transfer of matter from states of work to rest or hot to cold, as governed by the laws of thermodynamics. However, it's important to note that the relationship between entropy and the direction of time is an active area of research that's not yet fully understood. So this syllogism could only be valid if the concept of God presupposes an atemporal one. The premise 1 defines God into a permanent atemporal state of work, leading to a conclusion which traps God into a permanent atemporal state of unrest. So let's look at syllogism 2. Premise 1, God is not resting. We already discussed that from the last syllogism. Premise 2, God rests on the Sabbath. Conclusion, God is not in his Sabbath. So we cannot really accept the first premise here because of the failure of the previous syllogism, but in the interest of conversation, let's just give the first premise to him and see if the second syllogism works just for fun. If atemporality was a necessary feature of the previous syllogism, then it negates this syllogism because in this one, it clearly presumes a temporal nature to God. Premise 2 assumes that the state of the Sabbath is real, and further, a real potential state of God. If God is atemporal, then how does he move from not Sabbath to Sabbath? If we assume that syllogism 1 is sound and correctly implies atemporality, then syllogism 2, premise 2, is invalid, as God does not rest on the Sabbath. He never rests at all. However, if we do not presume a God that is permanently working, with man or otherwise, then it is valid to say that God is not in his Sabbath, as he never was or never would be. Syllogism 3, premise 1, God is not in his Sabbath. That's grandfathered in from the previous syllogism, so let's just move on. Premise 2, the Sabbath is made for God. God is the one who made the Sabbath. It was made by God, not for him. This wording implies another created it, or at least implies exclusivity of observance, which is clearly contradicted by the text. Let's look at Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing on your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. But the most important and obvious defeater comes from its contradiction with the text of the Bible itself. And even more devastating, the words are from Jesus himself. Let's look at Mark chapter 2, verses 27 through 28. Jesus says, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is the Lord even of the Sabbath. This passage suggests that the Sabbath is a gift from God to humanity intended for rest and rejuvenation. So either Jesus is wrong or Richard is. And in the conclusion of this syllogism, there has been no Sabbath. So even if we accept all the premises, make all the necessary presuppositions up till this point, we cannot accept the words of Jesus and the previous premises at the same time. As an atheist, I have the luxury of being detached from the words of Jesus. But without all of the presuppositions that go into the Jesus belief, why would I care about the God Sabbath? So I predict that Richard will have a very hard time convincing his fellow Christians to ignore this passage from Jesus. Then again, it's not like Christians are strangers to ignoring the Bible that they claim to believe in. Hell, that's exactly what Richard's doing. So the conversation with Richard has been rescheduled. Subscribe to get notified when that happens. I look forward to getting his reaction to this criticism and hopefully having a productive dialogue. So thank you kindly for the view. Like it if you loved it, share it if you want to spread it, and remember, it's the bridges we build, not the bridges we burn, that give us the edge.